during the research, in the period from the end of August to the end of October 2023. A total of 18 in-depth interviews were also conducted with union representatives from selected companies in the metal sector, which post workers abroad. Representatives of the branch trade union, the Independent Union of Metal Workers of Serbia, the Association of Independent Trade Unions of Serbia.
Experts in this field, who deal with the issue of protection of workers posted to Slovenia, Germany, and Serbia. Representatives of regional projects and platforms that monitor employment and migration, and employers who post workers to work abroad.
Semi-structured in-depth interviews were conducted as a frequently used research method in social sciences. This approach was chosen because it enables the collection of open-ended data and presentation of respondents' perceptions, attitudes, and opinions regarding the research questions Barabal and Weil, 1994, in order to collect the answers that are complete. A part of the questions was sent earlier in written form. The interviews were conducted by phone, Viber call, via Zoom, and in person. This method encouraged respondent participation and provided longer verbal responses to open-ended questions in a close dialogue between the researcher and the respondent. Minutes were made on the content of the interviews, and parts of them were recorded in accordance with the ethical rules and with the permission of the interlocutor.
Questions. 1. Do you have detailed information about the influx of workers which have been posted to and from your country? 2. To what extent has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the process of posting workers and the working conditions of posted workers in the industry? 3. What types of changes caused by the pandemic have posted workers and companies experienced in countries of origin and host countries? 4. To what extent has the pandemic restricted the implementation of the Posted Workers Directive in respective countries? Implementation prospects, that is, are you familiar with this directive and is it applied in the country? 5. Question for employers: how do the relevant companies and/or employers in the industry plan on mitigating future pandemic and post-pandemic risks? 6. To what extent do employers anticipate the future development of the posting process, and what are the expectations regarding jobs involving posted workers? 7. How do you anticipate and mitigate future risks? 8. Amendments to the law on employment of foreign citizens, new opportunities or social dumping.
Fiat currently has 145 posted workers in Slovakia Trnava, and 25 workers in Poland Tychy and Fiat or Stellantis group plants. The workers have a 1-year or 2-year contract, and their wages are the same as the wages of other employed workers in Poland and Slovakia, and they are also satisfied with the accommodation. The problem is overtime work, because due to their desire to earn as much as possible, they do a lot of overtime work. A number of workers do the work they do not do in Kragujevac, and they are not even being trained for the new car model, in order to compensate for being away from home or to earn more. A method was found which involves bonus payments before going to work abroad and after returning. However, it is important that the factory in Kragujevac will not shut down, and that the production of the new car model will continue.
Aptiv from Leskovac has 30 workers in Germany who work on installation and assembly of vehicles, and 87 workers in Romania Sibiu. Workers stay in Romania on the basis of a business trip for up to 3 months, and their wages are paid as per diems. According to the same principle, when the volume of work increased in 2021, workers from Romania and Turkey were hired in Leskovac. The following period will show whether workers will continue to be posted to work abroad or whether foreign workers will be employed. Everything depends on the volume of work and possible shortage of labor.
Hilex posts workers to Hungary. The workers receive the Hungarian minimum wage and are not satisfied because the cost of living in Hungary is significantly higher. There is also dissatisfaction with the collective agreement that was concluded in June 2023, which will be valid for the next 3 years. By the way, under this contract, The bonuses for work attendance were lost, and therefore the salary remained at the same level, which is unacceptable considering the rising inflation. Moreover, the very atmosphere of the conclusion was under pressure, but the rights were partially preserved. And in terms of the worker's material position, it is quite unfavorable.
Basically, workers who are posted to work abroad are in a worse position. Firstly, they often do jobs they do not do in their country of origin, nor are they trained for the jobs they will continue to do. This is actually labor shortage, which employers fill depending on the need. Working conditions are a special issue overtime work, because, in order to earn as much as possible, workers are ready to work 12 and 14 hours just to take home as much money as possible, but the machine must also rest. It is obvious that, in addition to the unions, employers are also bothered by works councils because they ask numerous questions related to working conditions and overtime work. It is important that overtime work is paid, but my opinion is that it is also important for the worker to rest, not to exhaust him or herself, because that way the worker will be more productive and have fewer injuries at work. The union must go back to the old 3/8 formula requirements: 8 hours of work, 8 hours of leisure, and 8 hours of rest or sleep. European legislation has done little to protect these posted workers, which can be seen in the length of working hours. Companies will continue with the posting process because of the labor shortage. Here is an example from Kragujevik, with the 4-team shift pattern and the introduction of 4 teams. And the plan is that workers come from Hungary in order to realize this plan and fill the labor shortage. And we were the ones who used to post workers to Hungary before.
The law on the employment of foreign citizens was originally enacted in order to employ as many migrant workers as possible. This primarily refers to Russian citizens, who have opened about 30,000 companies in the past period, and it is estimated that there are more than 100,000 of them. The legislators' expectation was that they would bring significant capital into our country. However, what is problematic is the fact that the benefits for the state cannot be seen. The collection of taxes and contributions. This law is harmful because the employment of migrants, under unknown conditions that are practically invisible to the National Employment Service, and where they are increasingly playing the role of employment agencies that can be registered outside of Serbia, and therefore are invisible to the labor inspection, also opens up space for the gray labor market that employers can easily exploit and employ cheap labor. I fear that this will be El Dorado for employers who operate illegally. We already have workers from Vietnam, China who work in bad conditions. They are paid poorly. Accommodation conditions are bad, and we are losing our qualified workforce who goes to work abroad in search of better wages and bet. In principle, at least according to the laws of supply and demand, if there is a labor shortage, the labor should be paid more, but here it is a paradox. There is a labor shortage, but the wages are kept at a low level. COVID has brought great disruption to all manufacturing processes. I think that the thing that has remained unchanged is the capitalist greed, which entails worker exploitation. Employee turnover has become a regular phenomenon. We are losing high-quality young workforce, even entire generations who leave for better conditions. And it is often the case that entire families leave, so it is a permanent departure. On the other hand, we fill the labor shortage with workers from other countries, which can only be useful for employers because they get cheap labor. Workers who work in bad conditions. And we actually face the paradox, which is that even though we have a labor shortage, the arrival of foreign workers makes it possible for salaries to be still kept at a low level, which continues to encourage the departure of domestic workers. All of us in Serbia had great expectations from the arrival of Fiat. It was thought that the arrival of a new car model would represent a significant boost for the automotive industry. It was met with great expectations, especially in Kragujevik. Bearing in mind the modern technology, and the fact that a large number of subcontractors was announced, and that there would be more car models. That would represent a step forward in the automotive industry, and the employment of a significant number of workers was also assumed. Unfortunately, the car model did not perform well in the market. It was designed for the American market as a Jeep with significantly lower fuel consumption, which was considered good performance after the economic crisis. However, the American market did not accept this model and, in fact, this model was only intended for the Serbian market which, being saturated and having low purchasing power, could not absorb the produced quantity. This leads to a reduction in production. And with the merger of Fiat into Stellantis, the decision was made to shut down the production of this car model, in order not to completely leave the Serbian market, considering the huge investments made by the citizens of Serbia, encouraged by the announced new state incentive measures. The decision was made to start the production of a new electric model. For now, we do not know how this model will be accepted on the European market, and especially on the Serbian market, bearing in mind the low purchasing power in Serbia. When Fiat announced the shutdown of the car model production in Serbia, a labor surplus emerged. The workers protested and a solution was found. For one part of the workers, who will remain in the Kragujevac plant and prepare for the production of a new model, while the second part of the workers was declared redundant, and workers left their jobs with severance pay, and a temporary solution was found for the third part of the workers, who would be posted to work in Slovakia and undergo training there for the production of the new model. The problem is that Slovakia does not produce the electric model, and that it was actually all about filling the labor shortage. The workers went there to work for a slightly higher salary. The accommodation facilities are not satisfactory, and their financial position would be improved by paying them a bonus. After returning to the country, it is unlikely that these workers will be involved in the production of a new car model in Kragujevac. Firstly, because they are not prepared and trained for this kind of production, and secondly, because the production of electric cars requires much fewer workers. So, probably the workers who remained at Fiat in Kragujevac will be joined by young people, with whom negotiations for training have already begun here.
Wacker Neuson in Kragujevac has 600 employees. They post their workers to Germany on the basis of intercompany cooperation and training. They have a collective agreement concluded in January 2023, and in the upcoming years. It will be seen how the provisions of the agreement are being implemented.
NSD of Slovenia deals with the problems of migrants and posted workers. Migrant workers are all those who come in transit, find employment in Slovenia, as well as those who leave and are employed in some other EU countries through Slovenian companies. Foreigners, economic migrants, asylum seekers, or those under international protection come to our office. There are a lot of skilled workers from the region, mainly from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, North Macedonia, and Kosovo, but there is also an increasing number of those from Asia, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. Workers from the Western Balkans are mostly employed in construction or hospitality, and transport workers and drivers are also in high demand. In addition to those who work in Slovenian companies, a large number of workers from Slovenian companies are posted to work abroad, so these are then considered posted workers from the so-called third countries. There are a lot of problems there, because workers are usually not familiar with their rights and are not sufficiently informed, and they often do not have proper documentation, so they face problems related to social and health insurance. We also had whole groups of workers from Serbia coming through Slovakia with their PDA-1 and visas to work in Slovenia. Their salaries were very low, some had no social or health insurance, and they were generally uninformed. Given that Slovenia is an important destination, as well as a transit country for labor from the Western Balkans, it is worth noting that 40% of members of the Independent Workers' Union of Slovenia is from Serbia, which is significant for the protection of employed foreign workers through the union.
We mostly have workers from the region of the former Yugoslavia. About 85% of all migrants in Slovenia are from the Western Balkans, 50% of which are workers from Bosnia and Herzegovina, while there are about 20,000 workers from Serbia. A significant part of the posted workers works in transport, the electrometal industry, and in the construction sector. The main problem with posted workers is the payment of wages, which are often lower than wages in Slovenia, and of course unpaid overtime work, which, in the case of transport workers, must be calculated separately for each country they pass through, i.e., sometimes it is a matter of changing the status of the worker, whether she is a posted worker or if it is considered transport under a bilateral agreement. This lack of status transparency is sometimes abused by employers, and workers receive significantly lower wages, which are paid only based on per diems, regardless of where they drive. We are also faced with the fact that workers never enter Slovenia, and that even the trucks they drive do not enter Slovenia, or they do, but very rarely, and that the companies are registered here. Another problem is the necessary documentation. Firstly, if it is about posting workers from third countries to Germany through Slovenia, in addition to PDA1, it is also necessary to have a Van der Elst visa. If the workers do not possess them, they will be deported or banned from entering the country. In addition, employees in border regions are also a problem, because sometimes they do not extend their stay, and that is where problems arise. COVID really brought big changes. Many workers were laid off, or were suspended with reduced wages or no wages at all. The movement regime significantly changed. The interventional laws helped a lot, but there were also significant restrictions, quarantine, where the conditions were not adequate, and where some workers were infected and others were forced to be in the same room with them. Another problem also arose, because many workers did not have social or health insurance. There were also frauds committed by employers so that workers could continue to work. And workers also took part in some frauds, obtaining forged PDA1 or PCR test certificates and other. European legislation has not significantly changed. Under the influence of the COVID crisis in terms of worker protection under labor law, there have been no changes in directives or regulations. The revised directive clarified and defined the compensation, but that was before the pandemic. The processes of movement and posting of workers will continue, because there is a shortage of labor, and unions must protect workers in order to prevent social dumping, prevent discrimination, and exercise labor and social rights. Moreover, Slovenia, as a transit country, employs workers from third countries here, but the real demand for work is elsewhere. So those workers from Slovenia are posted to another destination.
There are at least 3 ways in which Serbian citizens are posted to work in Germany. 1. Through employment in one EU country and then posting to another EU country. The most common posting countries are Slovenia and Croatia. 2. By establishing a sole proprietorship small craft business in one EU country and then self-posting to another EU country. Slovakia is the most common, a recent phenomenon with a growing tendency. 3. By posting or assigning from the home country based on a bilateral agreement with the country where the work is performed. Direct posting from Serbia. We did not notice a significant drop in the number of inquiries related to posted workers during the pandemic and after the COVID-19 pandemic. The nature of the inquiries, that is, of the impact on worker posting, was slightly changed and often included travel or preventive regulations. I am not sure that I can answer the question, that is, that I am able to assess the degree and nature of the change caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. I am familiar with the directive and apply fragments of it in my advisory work, but cannot answer the question to what extent the pandemic has limited the implementation of the Posted Workers Directive to the relevant countries.
The extent of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic was great due to the general crisis, restricted movement, and the general danger to employees in terms of infection, the reduced volume of business, and the state's crisis measures. A large part of the work that can be done remotely has been transferred to this form of work, and, where possible, the workers were returned to their home companies and countries. The first measure for the mitigation of future risks in the industry is establishing a crisis management as a preventive measure for better adaptation to potential new crisis situations. The second one is that all jobs that can be done remotely are prepared so that in the event of a crisis it can be enabled as soon as possible. Also, the production processes have reduced the presence of people in the plants through the use of robotics, which automatically reduced the possibility of infection in general. There has been an accelerated digitization, or more precisely, digital transformation. With the progress of IT technology, robotics, artificial intelligence, the use of virtual reality, and other technologies that enable remote work, employers, and therefore employees, will surely perform all tasks for which remote work is possible remotely. Risk anticipation and mitigation has become a new topic in corporate governance. Crisis management is entering a mode which involves the application of procedures for difficult or crisis working conditions. The COVID-19 crisis and growing geopolitical tensions are forcing companies to revise crisis management procedures practically every day. The increasing application of new technologies, primarily robotics, artificial intelligence, and the possibility of working remotely, provide employers with the opportunity to post workers practically virtually, in which case they physically remain in their company and country and perform their duties as posted workers through a virtual work environment.
The number of migrants and posted workers before and after the COVID-19 pandemic has changed significantly. In fact, we have a decrease in the number of posted workers and an increase in the number of migrants who are trying to reach Western European countries through the Western Balkans migration route. A large number of migrants, over 100,000 per country, has caused major disruptions and problems in the labor market, requiring a solution for a number of economic, social, and health needs of these people. Trade unions across Europe are trying to provide support to these people. They are fighting against social dumping, discrimination, and exploitation. Networks are being created for cooperation and contacts for quick reactions, and CIS is part of those networks.
In the beginning of the pandemic, it was really difficult. I worked in production in the metal sector as a person in charge of O's, and I must say that my employers really fulfilled all the requests that we had in order to protect the health of employees and ensure an uninterrupted production process. Equipment, protective gear, separation of employees, and transportation to the workplace were provided. However, it was not like that everywhere. For example, Europe did not act like that. There was a significant number of infected workers, and in some companies, unfortunately, workers died. The Occupational Health and Safety Rule Book was certainly important for the protection of employees during this period. I am of the opinion that in the upcoming period, in the event of a new crisis, the state should act more decisively, and that, in addition to recommendations and guidelines, there should be binding procedures to be followed by both employers and workers. When it comes to worker posting, Serbia lacks manpower. This is first of all seen in the lack of drivers, qualified construction workers, and craftsmen of various profiles. The young generation is mainly focused on new digital technologies, so almost no one graduates from vocational schools that have internships in companies and where qualified workers are trained. In order to overcome the shortage in domestic labor, foreign workers are employed, drivers from Sri Lanka, construction workers from India, who work in bad conditions and are poorly paid. Recently, we had a case at the company catering Aerodrome Beograd, when 60 workers were fired and foreign workers were hired in their place who were paid less and had poor accommodation conditions. Through the action of the trade union and the labor inspection, we managed to return the dismissed workers to work, and the employed foreign workers were transferred to other jobs.
When it comes to the posting of workers and migrants, it is a process that started before the COVID-19 crisis and accelerated after the pandemic. It is a communicating vessels principle. Europe's population is aging, the workforce is decreasing because the generations from the 50s and early 60s are retiring, and the new generations from the labor market have significantly smaller numbers. In search of filling that vacuum, the workforce reserve is being drawn from the Balkans. Since this reserve is also used because the WB countries also lack manpower due to depopulation and emigration, the labor shortage is further compensated by workers mainly from Southeast Asia, India, Bangladesh, Nepal. In the Western Balkan countries, we have the lowest unemployment rate in the last few decades. The reason, of course, is the aging of the population and emigration. It is a cycle where the labor shortage in Western Europe is filled with manpower from the Western Balkans, where there is also a labor shortage that is filled with workers from Southeast Asia. It is actually a very fast post-COVID process, which is difficult to control and predict. The EU legislation sought to regulate these processes and somehow prevent social dumping. However, there is a labor shortage, paperwork is being simplified, and these processes will certainly continue in the future. The focus of worker protection in Serbia has now shifted and expanded from the protection of domestic workers to the protection of foreign workers. Although wages should increase due to labor shortages, salaries have remained at a low level, and the working conditions of foreign workers are not satisfactory. We are witnessing more and more violations of rights and injuries at work with foreign workers, especially in the construction sector. So, the scope of protection under labor law is also shifting to foreign workers, which is, of course, a challenge for trade unions as well. When we talk about the posting of workers, it can be said that qualified workers leave Serbia and go to Western European countries, mainly via Slovenia, and here workers come mainly from Asia, and it's actually a vicious circle. The COVID crisis was a big shock and affected all sectors, mainly hospitality, tourism, transport. The workers lost their jobs, and when the conditions got better, the manpower fluctuation processes restarted. I think that companies are not prepared enough for future risks. Everything happens quickly and simply. If you bridge a labor shortage in one place, a new shortage appears in another place, so some processes must be strategically observed and analyzed as much as possible, rather than be approached with ad hoc solutions.
When it comes to the crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, it is very important how we, that is, Serbia, perceive this situation. In sociological terms, Serbia is on the edges of European capitalism, which is confirmed by the very slow transition and the slowing down of European integration. This is also reiterated by the fact that we are in a gray zone, where the import of dirty technologies is allowed, as shown by the story of lithium mining. And at the same time, the fact that this is a country that employs migrants, who work in conditions that are below the standards stipulated by valid legal regulations, our skilled and highly educated workforce goes to other countries where they are probably in a worse position compared to the workers of the host countries. At the same time, we have foreign workers in Serbia who also work in worse conditions, and we are witnessing more and more occupational injuries with these workers, which sometimes end in death. COVID-19 has changed many things. The pandemic has shown that many jobs can be done from home, that the 8-hour workday is definitely not productive, and that it is possible to reduce working hours or introduce flexible working hours, and a lot has changed in the work organization itself. For example, in terms of supply, I think we have learned important lessons from the pandemic crisis, and options have opened up for leaving the country, and there's increased fluctuation of workers who leave in search of better conditions and higher earnings. The scope of work has been changed, and only some companies have returned to the previous regime. Smaller companies and the corporate sector have adapted better than the large, cumbersome public sector, although the public sector provided better protection to workers. During the COVID crisis, it seems that it has not successfully adapted in this 2-year period. We actually have to responses to the challenges of the pandemic crisis. A relatively successful response and adaptation of the corporate sector, and return to the old work schemes of the public sector in terms of work organization and length of working hours,